Summer 2025, in the small town of Milltown, southern United States. The sun blazed down like fire, but no one dared complain. In a place where silence was a condition for survival, people had grown used to enduring heat, discomfort, and the kind of things no one dared to name. That morning, a sleek black Cadillac pulled up in front of the old police station, dust covering every corner of its glass windows. The car stood still, immaculately clean, unreasonably so in a place where weeds grew out of cracks in the road. The car door opened, and the man who stepped out drew a few STSS. Jake looked up and saw the stranger approaching. Black man, dressed unlike anyone from around here. Eyes too direct, footsteps too steady. Not a tourist, not a civilian, not someone looking for help. Jake frowned, voice dry. "Can I help you with something?" The man stopped at the desk. He didn't sit, didn't smile. His voice was low and clear with every word. "I want to see records from a case that happened here in 1991. You probably weren't on the force yet." Jake squinted, leaned forward slightly, his pen halting over an unfinished report. "Victim's name? No name. John Doe, black male, arrested after leaving a bar, died in the holding cell the next morning. Official cause listed as alcohol-related accident. Look it up." Jake stared at him longer. Something in that voice stirred unease, a kind of discomfort he could nurse. A tall black man, likely in his early 40s, wearing a sharply pressed dark suit and spotless black shoes. His face was expressionless, but each step he took carried a deadly composure, the kind only found in those who have stood behind great power. He said nothing, looked at no one, and walked straight toward the police station entrance, carrying a small leather bag. He looked like someone searching for a file, or more precisely, for a hidden piece of memory. Inside, Officer Jake Wallace, 43 years old, was manning the front desk, a tired-looking white man worn down from a long night shift. Yet his eyes still held a cold, watchful sharp and explain, like the past sneaking its way into the present, beyond his control. That was a long time ago. Those old records might have been destroyed. And who are you to him? "No one," the man replied, lips barely curving in a near smile. "Just someone who once watched him die. A child." Jake froze. The room seemed to fall into a brief silence. He clenched his fists. His breathing grew heavier, but he tried to remain composed. "You a reporter? A lawyer? Or some guy who just watched a few political dramas and thinks he's with the FBI now?" "I'm from this town," the man answered calmly. "Used to live on the corner of Clay and Harrison, from 1986 to 1991. Until one night no one wants to talk about." Jake turned pale. "Clay and Harrison? No way," he murmured. The man gave a slight nod. His voice dropped as his gaze pierced through Jake. "I'm his son." Jake's hand recoiled from the desk as if burned. His whole body tensed. Memories from 1991 tore through every wall of defense in his mind. Blood, screams, and the terrified look of a child dragged away from the scene. "He fell, didn't he?" "That's what my father made me tell the cops." A voice whispered inside Jake's head, though he didn't dare acknowledge it aloud. Jake jumped to his feet, his face flushed red, sweat forming on his forehead. "Get out, right now. I don't deal with people like you." The man didn't move. He gently placed his hand on the desk and whispered, "You were a child back then. You didn't kill my father. But you stayed silent," Jake growled. "I said get out!" And in front of several young officers just starting their shift, Jake Wallace, the most senior officer on duty that morning, used force to shove the man in the chest, not hard enough to knock him down, but enough to call it violence. The man only staggered half a step. He didn't strike back, didn't show anger. Quietly, he pulled a white handkerchief embroidered with the name Cole from his inner jacket and wiped off the part of his suit that had been pushed. Jake shouted, "What are you all staring at? This is a police station, not a funeral home." Then, in a blind fury, Jake spit directly into the man's face. The room went silent. No one dared to breathe. A young female rookie turned away. Someone muttered, "Jesus Christ." The man simply raised his hand and wiped the spit from his cheek. No anger, no reaction. He looked straight at Jake, his eyes no longer those of an ordinary man, but of someone who had seen too much, lost too much, and had nothing left to lose. He spoke softly, yet every word struck the stone floor like a drumbeat. Tomorrow I'll be back, with full documentation, justification, and authority. Then he turned and walked away, every step calm and unwavering, leaving the police station cloaked in terrifying silence. No one knew that the following day would mark the beginning of the moment Milltown's gates of hell would begin to open. The next morning, the entire town of Milltown felt as if it had been jolted awake by a cold slap. News spread like wildfire. A senior police officer was accused of racial discrimination and assault against a civilian visitor inside the police station. No one knew where the footage had come from, only that a short, shaky phone recording had been anonymously sent to the local TV station and was instantly picked up and reposted by dozens of Twitter accounts focused on racial justice. In the video, though shaky, it was clearly visible. A white officer spitting directly in the face of a black man in a suit, right in the middle of the station. And within just 5 seconds of the clip ending, hashtags began to explode across social media. #Justice for Cole, #Milltown Police, #racist cop. At 8 a.m., during an emergency meeting at City Hall, Mayor Lisa Garrett, a resilient middle-aged woman, stood silently in front of a projection screen, replaying the clip that had aired earlier that morning. "Dear God," she whispered. "Why now of all times?" Her personal secretary leaned in and whispered into her ear. "The man who was assaulted in the video has confirmed his identity. His name is Cole Jeremiah." Lisa froze. Cole Jeremiah from the White House. He's the president's policy coordination secretary, isn't he? And he was born in Milltown. He went to middle school with your son. The mayor closed her eyes. It felt like the storm had begun to stir, and she was standing naked in the middle of the square. At the same time, over at the police station, the air was so heavy it could have been sliced. Jake Wallace, pale as a sheet, sat in the chief's office like a convict awaiting sentencing. Only one thought repeated in his mind. "I spat on a White House official. Dear God, I spat in the face of the president's secretary." Police Chief Bill Moore, an aging man on the verge of retirement, flipped through Jake's personnel file. Each turn of the page sounded like a blade falling on Jake's neck. "Jake, do you realize what you've done? I didn't know. I thought he was just a civilian, a troublemaker. Who would have thought?" Bill slammed the file shut on the desk. "Ignorance doesn't lessen the offense. You assaulted and spat on a man who wasn't a suspect, wasn't resisting, didn't do anything." Jake stammered. "I apologized." "I'll apologize. I'll say I didn't recognize him." Bill shook his head, voice icy. "There's going to be a press conference tonight, and you will not speak. From this moment, you're suspended from duty. Your weapon and badge are to be surrendered. And if Cole decides to sue, I'm afraid no one will be able to save you." Jake lowered his head. His hands trembled uncontrollably. Meanwhile, at a high-end hotel on the outskirts of town, Cole Jeremiah stood in front of the mirror, shaving. His face was calm, his eyes as still as water. No trace of the spit, no sign of outrage remained, but in the depths of his eyes, something dangerous was smoldering. "Are you sure you want to confront them this quickly?" asked an older black man sitting on the lounge chair behind him, Cole's security advisor. Cole didn't answer. He put down the razor, wiped his face, and calmly said, "They think I'm here just to seek justice for a death 30 years ago. Aren't you?" Cole turned, his eyes cold as ice. "I'm here to bury the entire system that killed my father, that killed this town, that keeps killing the future of black children still being born in Milltown every year." Starting with Jake Wallace. Cole nodded, and then everyone who stayed silent. Everyone who knew but didn't speak. Everyone who defended wrong just to keep their position, their seat, or their pride. He paused for a moment, then looked out the window. "I won't reclaim the past. I'll warn them about the future." At 8 p.m. that evening, the press conference took place at the police headquarters, broadcast live on local television. The mayor stepped out first, her face tense. To her left stood Chief Bill. To her right was Cole Jeremiah, dressed in a gray suit, face calm as if he hadn't been humiliated just 24 hours earlier. The whole town held its breath. "I don't want anyone to lose their job," Cole began, "but I also won't accept that an act of disrespect is treated as trivial just because I didn't retaliate." He looked directly into the camera. Officer Wallace was right about one thing. "I don't belong here, not in the racial or political sense, but because I chose to step outside the circle of silence." Then he paused and concluded coldly, "But from today forward, I will stay in Milltown, not as a victim, but as the person who will now oversee the entire county police department. I will examine every file, reopen every case, call every person to testify, and I promise no one will be able to hide in the shadows anymore." The entire town fell silent, and at the back of the hall, Jake Wallace, no longer in uniform, stared at the stage with a hollow gaze. He knew a war had just begun. They say we cannot change the past. It's a phrase people often utter when someone loses a loved one in pain. But for Cole, the past didn't need to be changed. It needed to be unearthed, exposed, and made to testify before the truth. 30 years ago, Milltown, summer of 1995, an 8-year-old boy sat curled up behind the door, arms wrapped around his knees, eyes red and swollen. Outside, the sound of sirens blared, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting on the walls of the living room. On the floor lay a motionless black man, his shirt soaked in blood. Police searched every corner of the house. A white officer yelled out, "No gun found, sir," another muttered. "Damn it," shot the man dead with no evidence. A woman screamed, "You said he attacked? He was bringing flowers home. The grocery store camera has footage of it, but the footage never appeared." And the officer who fired the shot was promoted just a year later. The death of Raymond Jeremiah, Cole's father, was recorded in official files as death due to resisting a body search. A justified case of self-defense. No further investigation, no prosecution, no apology. Only a child of 8 who carried his father's name, and a fury wrapped tightly inside him for 3 decades. Cole stood silently inside the old records room of the Milltown Police Department. The room had no windows, no air conditioning, only the smell of damp paper, the scent of time, and the stench of forgotten truth. Beside him stood Sergeant Aaliyah Benton, a black female officer born and raised in Milltown, the first person to voluntarily join the Internal Reform and Investigations Task Force initiated by Cole. "Your father's file is here. It was marked as resolved, no further action needed, and hidden under a different name." Cole grabbed the file, his grip tightening, veins bulging. "They changed my father's name to R.J. Morrison just to avoid detection in any independent investigation?" Aaliyah nodded. "There's more. The officer who fired the shot was Richard Wallace, Jake Wallace's biological father." Cole stood frozen. He opened the file and each page hit his hand like a sharp blade. The internal report stated Raymond had attacked first, but there were no witness statements, no crime scene photos, no security footage despite the presence of a camera outside the house. The bullet sample was missing. The only person who signed off on the investigation was Bill Moore, who at the time was just a lieutenant. Cole growled. "They staged the entire thing. And even Bill was involved," Aaliyah whispered. "There's more. An investigator named Martinez tried to reopen this case in 2010. Just 2 weeks later, he was fired for lack of objectivity. He now lives in the suburbs. No one's heard from him since." Cole clenched the file. His eyes no longer held sorrow, only fire. "They've been silent for too long. I'll make every single one of them speak." That evening, inside a small bar in town, Cole sat quietly at the counter, a glass of untouched bourbon before him. A man sat down next to him, Jake Wallace. "What do you want?" Jake asked, his voice heavy. "I've been suspended." "What more do you want?" Cole didn't look at him. He took a small sip, then replied slowly, "I don't want you to lose your job. I want you to wake up." Jake scoffed. "Wake up? You're from Washington. You don't understand this place, what we face, how junkies and troublemakers treat cops." Cole turned to him, his eyes sharp as a blade. "I grew up here. I saw my father get killed, get framed, get forgotten, And I remember every face that stayed silent, including your father. Jake froze. My father was a hero. Number, your father was a murderer. And you are walking the exact same path. Jake stood up, furious. But then he sat back down, his eyes trembling. I didn't know any of that, Cole nodded. Good. Because I'm reopening every file. There will be hearings, press, national media. And if you want to hold on to any shred of humanity left inside you, start by doing the right thing. Jake swallowed hard. And if I do nothing? Cole stood up, leaned in close to his ear and whispered. Then when the name Wallace is called, it'll be 2 generations standing before the court. By the end of this chapter, we understand that Cole is no longer just someone who was humiliated. He is a man pursuing justice with a cold edge, fueled by pain forged into resolve. And the Milltown system, long since rotten, has begun to crack. Autumn wind rustled through the pine forest west of Milltown, dry leaves crunching beneath boots like whispers of long-buried secrets. The sunset turned the still lake blood red, but for Cole Jeremiah, nothing felt peaceful anymore. In his hand was an old water-damaged photo, a middle-aged man with intelligent eyes and a sorrowful face, standing in front of the Milltown Police Department in 2010. In the bottom right corner was a handwritten note. Detective Luis Martinez, the last internal investigator brave enough to touch the name Raymond Jeremiah. Cole drove along red dirt roads, dust rising under the fading sunlight. The GPS had no signal, but he had traced the lead from an anonymous call. He lives on the edge of Cascade Forest. A cabin, no address, no fence. Just an old dog and rotting memories. The car stopped in front of a silver-gray wooden shack, as if pulled from the pages of an old Western novel. An aging shepherd dog lay dozing on the porch, one ear drooping, one eye blind. Cole stepped down. Each footstep on the decaying leaves felt like stepping into the past. Luis Martinez? I'm Cole. Jeremiah. The door creaked open. A gaunt, silver-bearded man with weathered eyes appeared like a ghost surviving a war. He stared at Cole as if seeing an apparition. Jeremiah, dear God, you look exactly like him. Inside the house, everything was covered in dust. On the walls were old case files, crime scene photos, bullet samples, and maps of the town from the 90s. The room felt like an investigation unit frozen in time. Martinez, hands still bearing old scars, shakily poured some whiskey. I once had it all. Medals, rank. Then I chose to investigate your father's death. After that, I lost everything. What did they do to you? Cole asked, his voice tight. They didn't have to kill me, just crushed my name, labeled me mentally unstable, and that was it. I vanished. He opened a wooden chest and pulled out an old VHS tape, written in marker on the label. Store camera, July 1995. Cole gently touched the tape, as if afraid it would dissolve under pressure. This is the proof that my father never attacked anyone. Martinez nodded, his eyes flashing with both madness and hope. They thought I wouldn't dare keep a copy. But I did, because one day, I believed someone like you would return. The next morning, the tape was sent to Washington inside an old metal box, sealed with red wax. Cole sat in his temporary office at the Milltown Police Department. On the wall behind him hung a restored portrait of his father, Raymond Jeremiah, wearing a white shirt, holding a bouquet of sunflowers, smiling softly. What are you planning to do with the footage? Aaliyah asked. Cole didn't answer right away. He just stared at his laptop screen where the video played frame by frame in grainy footage. His father stepped out of the grocery store. 3 officers approached. They didn't speak, just drew their guns. Then a shot. Blood splattered on the flowers. Soaked the shirt, spread across the sidewalk. No resistance, no reason, no justice. Cole whispered. I'll present this tape at the hearing, publicly, to the press, to the entire city. Aaliyah clenched her fists. Are you sure you're ready to blow up the entire system? Cole turned to her, eyes cold as stone. I'm not the one blowing it up. They planted the bomb 30 years ago. I'm just lighting the fuse. That day in Milltown, the air felt thick. Reporters swarmed the police department. Black residents gathered outside holding signs high. Justice for Raymond Jeremiah. I have a father too. No more silence. And in their hearts, one name echoed like a wake-up call. Cole Jeremiah. Not just a presidential secretary, but the voice of the forgotten dead. That morning, Milltown City Hall no longer resembled an administrative building. It looked like a stage, and on it, an unofficial hearing unfolded beneath the lights of the press, under the piercing gaze of the public, and under the pressure of a rotten past freshly unearthed. Inside the large chamber, every seat was filled. Camera flashes went off constantly. Pens scribbled faster than the heartbeat of the person being written about. Citizens stood outside, peering through the glass, hands tightly clasped, as if awaiting a verdict on their own fate. In the center, Cole Jeremiah stood tall, his face completely composed. In front of him sat the town council officials, a representative from the Department of Justice, and in the corner of the room, former police chief Bill Moore, now retired, still considered an untouchable symbol of the old guard. I'm not here to stir scandal. I'm here for a man who was killed outside a grocery store, unarmed with no chance to defend himself. That man was my father. Cole's voice was low, steady, unwavering. He stepped forward and held up an object, the original VHS tape, now digitized and enhanced to HD resolution. On the large screen behind him, the video began to play. The room went completely still. The footage appeared in black and white. A black man, Raymond Jeremiah, stepped out of the grocery store. In his hands were a bouquet of flowers and a loaf of bread. He smiled at the shopkeeper. The camera caught that moment perfectly. A patrol car screeched to a stop. 3 white officers jumped out. They asked no questions, gave no warning. One officer snatched the groceries. The second pushed Raymond to the ground. A kick to the stomach. An unintelligible shout, then a gunshot. Blood spilled onto the sidewalk. The bouquet scattered and was crushed. The image froze. No sound, no breathing. Cole turned around, his eyes locked onto the silver-haired man seated in the back row, arms crossed. Bill Moore. Mr. Moore, you signed the order to terminate the investigation into my father's death in 1995, correct? Moore smirked and nodded slightly, maintaining a condescending air. I followed protocol. Raymond Jeremiah was a hostile subject, displayed threatening behavior. Cole held up a thick folder. This is the internal report by investigator Luis Martinez, who was fired after presenting contradictory evidence. He paused briefly. And this is the draft testimony from the grocery store clerk, the woman who was never called to testify. She fled town in fear. Moore frowned. Cole took a step forward. You used to be a hero, but you destroyed evidence, fabricated testimonies, and distorted the truth to protect your system, a council member interjected. You're accusing a former police chief without legal grounds. That's dangerous. Cole looked directly ahead. This isn't an accusation. This is an exposure of the truth, and if the law won't act, the justice of the people will. When the hearing ended, it was as if the town had exploded. News spread at wildfire speed. 1995 tape reveals truth behind Raymond Jeremiah's fatal shooting. Victim's son confronts former police chief in public hearing. Milltown faces unprecedented moral reckoning. That night, national television networks aired the video across their primetime slots. Residents took to the streets raising banners. We remember. No more invisible victims. Then, from within the crowd, an elderly woman shakily stepped forward toward a news crew. I was the shopkeeper. That day, I've been silent for nearly 30 years, but now I'm ready to speak. Back at the temporary office, Aaliyah entered with a heavy look. The federal prosecutor's office has requested all files related to Moore. Cole remained silent, eyes fixed on the window. The soft yellow glow of the streetlight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the furrow in his brow. In his hand was the framed photo of his father. I used to think I had reached the top, working beside the president. But it turns out the true summit was finding the courage to face the place I once ran from. Aaliyah offered a faint smile. And now you're not running anymore. Milltown was no longer silent, but it hadn't truly spoken yet. When the camera lights pulled away, the simmering rage began to rise again from the old musty cellars, where remnants of the old power still clung on. That afternoon, cold rain fell. The downpour tore through the town's tense atmosphere, washing away part of the blood-stained history, but also awakening predators that hunted in the dark. At Cole's temporary office, located in a small wooden cabin near the western forest, Aaliyah was pouring coffee while reading through her emails. I found the internal camera layout map from the police department in 1995. One section was deliberately deleted, but the backup data still exists in the old system, in the basement archive. At that moment, the phone rang. Cole picked up. A raspy male voice came through, processed through a voice modulator. "If you keep digging, you won't live to file those records. This town has secrets, and we've killed to keep them that way." "I know," Cole replied calmly. His voice was even, but his eyes had darkened. "And I also know I'm not the first person you've threatened to kill, but I will be the last." The call ended. A flash of lightning lit up the window. Wind howled through the glass like a ghostly warning from the restless past. That night, Cole and Aaliyah snuck into the old records basement of the police station, abandoned since the 2003 flood. The basement was pitch black, the walls damp, rust covering every metal file shelf. The air reeked of moldy paper, moisture, and dried blood. Cole turned on a flashlight. Aaliyah stayed close behind. "There's something down here. Something long dead, but still clinging to life," Aaliyah whispered, voice trembling. They reached shelf 12, compartment 4, where recordings from the 90s were stored. Cole opened a metal box. Inside was an old analog hard drive. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed from the far end of the corridor. Someone else was down there. Cole signaled to turn off the light. They pressed against the wall. Footsteps echoed, slow and deliberate. A tall man in a black leather coat approached, wearing gloves, holding a crowbar. His breathing was heavy, like that of a hunting beast. Just as he got close, Cole slammed a cabinet door into the man's face. Then he and Aaliyah bolted out of the basement. They reached the car and jumped into the SUV. The stranger's car followed. In the rearview mirror, bright yellow headlights glared like the eyes of a demon in the night. Aaliyah screamed, "They really want to kill you." Cole hit the gas, swerving onto a dirt road through the forest. The car behind stayed on their tail. Engine roaring, sharp turns, trees flashing past like forest knives demanding a blood debt. Suddenly, one of Cole's rear tires blew out. The SUV swerved violently. They flipped. Crash, impact, then silence. The door burst open. Blood trickled from Aaliyah's forehead. Cole's hand was bleeding. The stranger approached, raising the crowbar. As he swung it down, bang! A gunshot rang out from a distance. The attacker froze. Blood sprayed from his shoulder. He fled, disappearing into the woods like a ghost. The shooter was Sheriff Dana Whitmore, acting police chief, Cole's secret ally from the beginning. She calmly extended a hand to pull them up. "Your files are more important than my life. Let's go." The next morning, at the federal security office, Cole stood before a screen playing the video recovered from the hard drive. The footage was shaky, low quality, but clear enough to reveal the person who gave the kill order in 1995. It wasn't the officer who pulled the trigger. It was Bill Moore himself standing behind, signaling to execute Raymond. Jeremiah. The angle came from a ceiling camera no one knew existed. Cole turned to Aaliyah. "This isn't just my story anymore. This is a national crime, protected by systems and white collars." Aaliyah gripped his hand. "We'll bring it to light, no matter the cost." The next day, a black envelope with no return address was delivered to Cole's office. Inside was a photo of Aaliyah's daughter playing basketball at school, along with a short message. "Say one more word, and that child will be next to follow your father." Cole clenched the envelope. His eyes blazed. He said nothing. But in that look, a storm that would not retreat was already on its way. When fear becomes silence, crime will take it as consent. That was the sentence Cole wrote in his journal the night before making the biggest decision of his life. On November 10th, at exactly 7 p.m., while millions of Americans were having dinner in front of their televisions, a special broadcast suddenly took over the national network. The host said only one sentence: "We now give the floor to the man who brings truth from the shadows of America." On screen appeared the solemn yet steady face of Cole Jeremiah, presidential secretary. He wore a black suit, a white tie, and behind him was the United States flag. I am the son of Raymond Jeremiah, a black American citizen who was murdered inside the Milltown Police Department in 1995 under the direct order of former police chief Bill Moore, who was later promoted and took part in designing national security policy. I am not standing here for revenge. I stand here to demand justice for my father and for all those whose voices have been choked by this system. The footage from the basement camera was played. The video clearly showed Moore's gaze and nod giving the order to fire. No one could deny it anymore. Within just 12 hours of the broadcast, Cole's entire system, email, phone, bank accounts was hit by cyber attacks. Strange men were spotted outside Aaliyah's house. Cole was placed under temporary witness protection, but the media and public had already exploded. Over 4 million shares in just 6 hours on social media. Citizens flooded FBI headquarters demanding a full investigation into the Milltown Police Department. 36 local mayors signed a petition calling for reform of internal police procedures. The old guard fought back through the media, accusing Cole of exploiting his identity, stirring up politics, and damaging the country's image. But what they didn't have was the people's empathy. On December 23rd, the trial of former police chief Bill Moore officially opened. For the first time in 30 years, the real name of the man who commanded the killing of Raymond Jeremiah was made public. The courtroom was packed. Many black families brought photos of their own loved ones who had also died in so-called accidental shootings. Cole sat in the witness chair, facing Moore, the man who had stolen his father's life and the lives of many others. You didn't kill my father with your hands. You killed him with the complicity of power and silence. And silence is the greatest crime in a nation that calls itself free. Moore bowed his head. He gave no defense, no denial. For the first time, he admitted to the wrongful order from the past. The trial ended. Bill Moore was sentenced to 20 years in prison and stripped of all titles, becoming the first former officer in Milltown convicted of power abuse resulting in death. As Cole left the courthouse, an old neighbor of his father, now white-haired, approached and embraced him. I saw them take your father, but I was afraid. I said nothing. Please forgive a man who once bowed his head to survive the storm. Cole held the old man's hand. Tears fell into his palm, but this time, they were tears of rebirth. Cole returned to Washington, declined all nominations for promotion, and asked to transfer to a community education project. Aaliyah wrote the entire story into a book titled Speak to Survive, The Journey of the Man Who Refused Silence, which sold 2 million copies within a month. In Milltown, a memorial plaque for Raymond Jeremiah was erected in front of the police department, the place he once walked into and never walked out of. Justice does not come from power. It comes from the courage to speak the truth. A society can only be healthy when it dares to confront its past, no matter how ugly. Silence in the face of injustice, even just a turned gaze, is part of the crime. And forgiveness does not begin with forgetting, but with acknowledgement. If you witness an injustice, will you remain silent to stay safe? Or will you dare to speak up, even if it's just one sentence, to defend the truth?